Before we measure intelligence, what exactly are we measuring?
Understanding IQ.
Before we start understanding the different types of intelligence and the different types of quotients, let us understand the most commonly understood question. And that is IQ, intelligence quotient. Whenever somebody says, he is very intelligent, what do we generally mean? Very often, we mean that the person studies well, understands difficult concepts quickly, solves mathematical problems, remembers information, reasons logically or performs exceptionally well in examinations. And somewhere along the way, we have started believing that all of this can be compressed into one number,
IQ.
But where did this idea actually come from?
Who invented IQ?
Who gave it its name? What does an IQ test actually measure today? And perhaps most importantly, does a high IQ really mean that a person is intelligent in every area of life? Let us go back to the beginning. The beginning was not actually IQ. At the beginning of the 20th century, France was facing an educational problem. Some children were struggling in ordinary classrooms and needed additional educational support. The French government wanted a practical way of identifying children who might require special assistance. In 1904, psychologist Alfred Binet, working with physician Theodore Simon, was asked to help develop such an assessment. Their work resulted in the Binet-Simon scale, published in 1905. This was a landmark development because it was one of the first practical standardized attempts to assess children's cognitive abilities. But here is something extremely important.
Binet did not originally create IQ as the single number we know today. He was interested in identifying children who needed educational support. One of the important ideas emerging from the Binet-Simon work was mental age. Suppose a child was chronologically 6 years old but performed on cognitive tasks at a level typically achieved by an 8-year-old. The child's mental age could therefore be described as 8. This created a way of comparing cognitive performance with what was typical for different age groups. And this is where the story of IQ begins to become interesting. So who actually coined the term IQ? The term, intelligence quotient, was coined by German psychologist William Stern in 1912. The German term was intelligence quotient. Stern proposed a ratio comparing mental age with chronological age and multiplying the result by 100. The basic formula was IQ is equal to mental age divided by chronological age times 100. So if a 10-year-old child performed at the level expected of a 10-year-old, 10 divided by 10 times 100 equals 100. If the mental age was 12, 12 divided by 10 times 100 equals 120. And if it was 8, 8 divided by 10 times 100 equals 80. This is where the familiar number 100 entered the story. But there was a problem. Imagine applying that same formula to adults. A 30-year-old with a mental age of 40 would have 40 divided by 30 times 100 equals 133. But what happens when mental age stops increasing in a simple linear fashion? The ratio method becomes increasingly unsuitable. So the IQ system evolved. Enter Lewis Terman and the Stanford Binet. The Binet-Simon test crossed the Atlantic. American psychologist Lewis Terman, at Stanford University, revised and expanded it. In 1916, he published the Stanford revision of the Binet-Simon scale, which became known as the Stanford Binet. This played a major role in bringing intelligence testing into mainstream American psychology and education. And this is an important historical distinction. William Stern coined the term IQ. Binet and Simon developed the foundational intelligence scale. Terman substantially revised and popularized that approach in the United States through the Stanford Binet. So when we casually say, IQ was invented by one person, we are actually simplifying a much more complicated history. But IQ testing did not stop there. Another major development came from American psychologist David Wechsler. Wechsler believed that intelligence should not be reduced simply to the old mental age or chronological age ratio. Modern intelligence testing therefore moved toward what is called deviation IQ. Instead of asking,
What is your mental age compared with your chronological age? The question became, how does your performance compare with people of your age in the norm group? This is much closer to the IQ system we know today. Modern standardized IQ scales are generally constructed so that the average score is 100. On many widely used tests, the standard deviation is 15. That means that a score of 100 represents the mean of the relevant norm group, while scores above or below 100 indicate how far a person's performance lies from that average. For example, on a scale with a standard deviation of 15, 100 is equal to average. 115 is equal to approximately 1 standard deviation above the mean. 130 is equal to approximately 2 standard deviations above the mean. 85 is equal to approximately 1 standard deviation below the mean. 70 is equal to approximately 2 standard deviations below the mean. But please remember, IQ is a standardized score, not a measurement of the entire human being. That distinction is extremely important. So how is IQ tested today? Today, a proper intelligence assessment is much more sophisticated than answering a few questions on a website and immediately receiving a number. Professionally administered intelligence tests can examine several aspects of cognitive functioning. Depending on the test, these can include areas such as verbal comprehension. How well does a person understand and reason with language? Fluid reasoning. Can the person identify patterns, relationships, and logical principles in unfamiliar problems? Working memory. Can the person hold information in mind and mentally manipulate it? Processing speed. How efficiently can the person perform certain simple cognitive tasks? Visual spatial reasoning. Can the person understand and manipulate visual information and spatial relationships? The Stanford Binet 5, for example, provides a broader cognitive profile involving fluid reasoning, knowledge, quantitative reasoning, visual spatial processing and working memory, along with verbal and nonverbal components. The Wechsler family of assessments similarly produces a profile rather than merely asking someone to solve one type of puzzle. So a professionally obtained IQ score is not simply, you answered 42 questions correctly, therefore your IQ is 127. The process involves standardized administration, scoring and comparison with an appropriate normative population. And that is why a random online quiz should not automatically be treated as equivalent to a professionally administered psychological assessment. And now comes the most important question. If IQ measures cognitive ability, does a high IQ guarantee success? No. And this is precisely where my larger inquiry into intelligence begins. A person can have excellent reasoning ability and still make terrible decisions in relationships. A person can be academically brilliant and yet be unable to manage anger. A person can solve complicated mathematical problems and still be unable to adapt when life suddenly changes. A person can have an exceptional IQ and yet struggle to understand another person's emotions. A person can be intellectually gifted and still fail to work effectively with people. So perhaps the problem is not with IQ. Perhaps the problem is with our expectation that IQ should represent everything we mean by intelligence. IQ tells us something important, but it does not tell us everything. And that is where our next questions begin. What about the ability to understand society? What about the ability to maintain relationships? What about the ability to regulate emotions? What about the ability to adjust when circumstances change? What about the ability to translate knowledge into appropriate behavior? Could these also be forms of intelligence? And if they are, can they also be understood, developed, and perhaps even measured? This is the journey I want to take forward. We have traditionally asked, what is your IQ? Perhaps it is time to ask something much larger. What kind of intelligence do you possess, and which kinds still need to be developed? Because a human being is far more complicated than a number. IQ may tell us how effectively we can think. But perhaps the real measure of human development lies in what we do with that ability. And that takes us beyond IQ, towards EQ, SQ, RQ, AQ, BQ, and eventually towards understanding the many dimensions of human success. That is where our real exploration begins. This is Dr. Rekha Kale, your life coach and success mentor, helping you to probe deeper into your own being. Thank you for watching. If you found this video valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And keep on exploring how intelligent you think you are.